Okay.
How's it going, everyone? I'm Drew Gurian.
I'm Mike Cardiello.
And thanks, everyone, so much for coming out and spending your time here with us at Adorama Camera. And of course, thanks to those tuning in online as well, wherever you may be. Before we get started, I just want to say a huge thanks to both Tether Tools for providing us with a ton of amazing gear that we have here to play with tonight. And of course, to Adorama for hosting all of us here. So let's give them a well-deserved round of applause. Thank you, guys. So it's a Thursday night in New York City, and the city obviously has a lot to offer, so we really do appreciate you all coming here to be nerds with us. So definitely appreciate that. We will have plenty of time for questions at the end, but if you have any quick questions throughout, please feel free. We're a small enough group. Much rather this be a conversation than us just talking to you the whole time. So any questions at all, you don't have to even raise a hand, just yell it out, and we'll move forward. So today we're going to be talking about preparing for shoots, both in studio and on location, and all that goes into making sure that a shoot runs as smoothly as possible. The ins and outs of digiteching, what to look for when hiring a tech, their role on a production, and when and why photographers actually use them. Problem solving in the field, which we can all, we've all dealt with on many an occasion. And of course, being prepared for the worst case scenario. When you least expect it, that always does jump out to bite us. So very important things. Of course, the gear that makes up various types of Digitech setups as well, and setting up a tethered capture session and a lot more as well. So to start, I'm going to share with you just a brief overview of my background and some of the work that I've done in the industry as a photographer here in New York City. In a little while, Mike's going to jump in a bit more so and talk more about the technical stuff that he knows way more than I'll ever attest to, but we'll get to that too. So this is me. That was actually shot by Robert Kaplan on the left, who does a lot of teaching here as well, runs a great website called the Photo Brigade. And the shot on the right is of me with Bo, the former first dog that was in the White House. Got to shoot former President Barack Obama a couple of years back, and was an amazing experience. So just to go through a bit of sort of how I got started. So I got into photography without any idea whatsoever that this was going to turn into a profession. When I was 14 or 15, I discovered live music and my love for that around the same time that I really just thought that it was cool to take a picture of a band that I enjoyed. I happened to be family friends with an up-and-coming rock band at the time called Guster. And like lots of young photographers and music lovers, I simply liked the idea of taking photos of a band that I enjoyed. The interest really grew from there. And I photographed them a ton of times over the course of a couple of years, and this really grew into a passion. Most of the stuff that I shot of them, or basically all of the stuff I shot of them, was absolute garbage, and none of you will ever see it. It'll never see the light of day. But the point is that by shooting them so many times, I learned the basics of photography. And this was back in the film days, which I think was a lot harder in many ways back then. But I learned the basics of exposure and composition and capturing a moment and developing film and all that stuff. But really the basics of photography, which is how I started to build my career. By the time I was heading to college, I knew that I wanted to pursue photography on a greater level. And I also happened to play drums throughout bands throughout high school and college. So I thought that mixing photography and music seemed like a really great thing to do. So I studied photography and graphic design while I was in college. They really just seemed to make that much more sense to me. And you'll see in a minute that really helped me down the road. And while I was there, I interned for two very well-known New York City photographers, Joe McAnally, who some of you may be familiar with. He's kind of known as a big production lighting guy. He's a Nikon ambassador. He's done a ton of amazing work over the years. And Danny Clinch, who's a very well-known music photographer. So worked for both of them over the summers while I was in college. And then I graduated college, worked as a graphic designer for a year. I had that communication design degree, so jumped right into the ad world and quickly realized that the corporate world was not my cup of tea. While I was there, a band that I had known over the years asked if I would go on the road with them and shoot some photos and video for them, and I put in my 2 weeks, and that became the start of my freelance career. At that time, I was living in Pennsylvania in a pretty small market, and I was shooting mostly weddings and events, not really doing the type of work that I kind of thought I could be doing or should be doing, just in a really small market. And when you're in a small market, you can obviously outgrow that and all of that. So I'd always stayed in touch with Joe's studio, and I started applying to grad schools because I thought that that was sort of the next best thing for me to do in my career path. And in the midst of applying for grad schools, Joe's assistant at the time happened to be leaving, and they offered me a job as his first assistant. So working with Joe was amazing. I was his first assistant for almost 5 years. I traveled all over the world with him. I think in 2012 I flew like 170 miles on Delta alone, so I was just all over the place. But I got to work side by side with one of the kindest, most technically proficient and hardworking people in the industry, and I truly owe a huge bit of gratitude to both he and Lynn, his studio manager, and Annie, his wife, and the whole crew there, because they really brought me to a place within the industry that I never could have been at before working for him. So since that time, I've really worked to carve out a career path of my own over the last several years while living and working here in New York. I've done a good bit of work ranging from editorial clients like the Associated Press to commercial clients like Red Bull and Reebok to marketing and ad work for brands like Nikon and various ad agencies. This is just a handful of some portrait and lifestyle work that I've shot over the past few years. This in particular is of, I think now, 8-time Grammy-winning rapper Kendrick Lamar, one of the most down-to-earth musicians you could ever ask to work with. It was well below freezing outside. It was like 18 degrees. And he was cool with coming out onto the terrace. This is the Dream Hotel downtown. And we were shooting all day. And he came out there, and we were out there for probably like a minute and a half, 2 minutes, but had this set up and got a really nice frame out of it. Here's a portrait I shot last fall of Ed Sheeran in a hotel room in about 40 seconds. A lifestyle shoot I did earlier this year out in LA. The one and only Quincy Jones, one of the most gracious, incredible people you could ever hope to meet or spend any time with. What I thought would be like a 3 to 5 minute shoot, which is oftentimes what celebrity shoots are. This ended up being like half an hour. And he was just the coolest guy. He looked at my assistant that was with me at the time and asked where he was from, and he had sort of a Nordic look to him, and he started speaking to my assistant in Swedish. And I was told by Quincy's assistant that he spoke something like 24 languages. Find that a bit hard to believe, but nonetheless. He looked at me and asked where I was from. I told him I'm Russian and Ukrainian, and he started speaking to me in Russian. And I don't speak any Russian, but he's like, here's the only 3 words, the only 2 words that you need to remember, and has me repeat them back to him a couple times. And I, of course, have forgotten what those were since. But as the shoot was wrapping, I said, by the way, Mr. Jones, what did you teach me to say? And he just looked at me very seriously, and he said, beautiful booty. So this is Mr. Quincy Jones for you. But an amazing human being, and really happy to be able to have experiences like this. Bonnie Raitt photographed her just a couple years ago for the release of an album. Another rapper named Mick Jenkins, I shot this at the Bowery Ballroom for Red Bull. This is Ted Duane. He's the bassist in Mumford & Sons. I shot this on the terrace of the Airbnb that he was staying in a couple summers back in Brooklyn. An amazing model based in New York. His name is Yves Matthew. I shot this a few months back at my studio in Brooklyn, just a personal shoot. This is Tony Goldwyn of ABC's Scandal. He plays the President of the United States on the show, and I just really wanted to give him, I told him to give me something really quiet and contemplative. I sat down, sort of gave him a similar gesture, and he just sat down and nailed it. So just to give you a quick overview of the type of work that I've done over the years. And Mike, I'm going to hand it over to you now for a couple.
All right. Hello, everyone. Well, I'll just go over like a quick brief overview of like how I got into digiteching in New York, and kind of just the path from a decade ago from going to photo school. I come from Montana. I went to school in Missoula, photo school, for 2 years before studying abroad in Wellington, New Zealand, where I took my first Photoshop class. After searching for a better photo department when I came back, I went up to Canada to a conceptual art school called Emily Carr, where I learned how to print color and various other things, like use their virtual drum scanner like over and over and over. After I finished school, I moved down to Portland, Oregon. I tried to assist, and I didn't have a lot of luck or understanding of how the commercial photo industry worked. And it wasn't until I moved to Montreal 2 years later that I began to dabble in the photo industry. After moving back to New Zealand, this time to Auckland, working with music video production companies, I received a scholarship to King Size Studios, which is the biggest and best photo studio and rental house in New Zealand. And I basically spent 3 months with full reign of their facilities, learning lighting on a larger scale, and learning about Capture One, which we'll talk about today. I had an amazing mentor, which was the owner of the studio, and he really encouraged some of us to move to New York City, so here I am. After landing in New York City, I began freelancing the first week that I got here at Milk Studios, which just happened to be Fashion Week, where I stayed for 4 months as I began, gather the lay of the land, kind of figure out how everything was working here. And after 4 months, I decided that was enough, and I basically went on my own and spent 2 very, very slow months that winter going through Capture One, watching tutorial after tutorial. And every time I was assisting on set, I was asking every tech every question possible. I would walk into digital rooms, rental houses, and studios, and just ask people as many questions as I could, because it's a confusing profession to get into. After that, later that year, I took the Phase 1 certification course, which, I don't know really what to say about that. And around that time, I met Drew. But I just wanted to talk a little bit, because Digitech world, there's a couple different ways you can get into it, and I got into it through assisting. So I was a first assistant for a couple of photographers, including an Australian fashion photographer here, who threw me on a very big digital tech ad job after hearing my aspirations of becoming a tech. And I used to interview all of his techs and ask questions about all the gear that I didn't understand. And it was a really big lesson for me, because it was a lesson on studying at home versus the field. I ended up having to sub-rent a MacBook Pro battery in the middle of the shoot, and I had to run 6 blocks down to the rental house, completely drenched in sweat. And I'm proud to say that we are still friends and still working together.
That's a good thing. And that's you with?
This is Molly Shannon in LA. Photographer was Ari Michelson, really nice guy. I'm going to show you a couple variations of different digital, workstations as we put it, but it's basically just a computer connected to a camera. Here's a shoot I did with Andrew Hetherington about a month ago. And in this shoot, we had to have a workstation that was light, small, nimble, as we moved quickly between shots, and we really didn't have a lot of room to have a whole Digitech cart or anything set up on set, because it was actually on the platform of his show. Fun fact is, as we took this picture, Grizzly Bear was sound checking right behind us, which is really cool. Here I am standing in for Trevor Noah, lighting for Martin Schuler. Bonnie Raitt with Drew. I'm sitting there. Here's the White House with Drew, which is a really fun shoot. Here's a cheesy photo of me in a Canon Hong Kong commercial that was filmed in New Zealand, posing as a photographer. It was also my first time in a helicopter.
You pull off the part pretty well.
Yeah. Here I am in my usual place, on the sidelines, hanging out with our directors or the photo editors.
So why to tether? Why should any of us tether? For starters, tethering is essentially connecting a camera to a computer, tablet, or monitor to instantly transfer, view, and edit images on a larger display than our camera is able to offer. The number one reason for tethering, and really the only reason that you should need, is that you'll actually produce better work. Judging your photos off a tiny LCD on the back of our cameras, they keep getting bigger and bigger, but it's still a very small screen, and they're only going to get so big. It's really tough to do. How often have any of you finished a shoot, think you've done a great job, gone home, downloaded the photos, and saw that there was something really stupid that you could have fixed in camera? Any hands? If your hands aren't up, you're lying, I know that. All of us. It happens to all of us all the time. So doing something like this is actually something that will make a difference in our work. There's tons of manufacturers trying to sell us gear that's going to make us a better photographer. Some of it does, some of it doesn't, but this all happens, of course, more than anything with practice. But something like this actually does help you. The industry, I'm sorry, I just said that. You'll spend more time behind the camera and less time behind the computer. Since you can actually see what you're doing in much greater detail, you'll become more of a perfectionist, getting everything right in camera and dialed in on set. And I know, speaking for myself and probably just about any photographer, we're photographers to be spending our time behind the camera. That's why I do this, for the love of actually taking photos. The more time I can do that and the less time I can spend in Capture One, in Photoshop, in Lightroom, whatever it is, the happier I am. On lots of editorial, commercial, and ad shoots, there's really an expectation that you will be tethered into a computer. It not only makes your productions look a lot more legit, which can actually be really important on certain shoots, but there's an actual need to be able to show the images to the client or creative director in real time. So there's certain types of shoots like weddings and events where traditional wired tethering, i.e. a USB cable or a FireWire cable, whatever it is, into a computer, May not be the most ideal type of situation, but there's now actually some really strong wireless options as well, should a client need to see images in real time as they're being shot. A good example of this would be shooting a branded event where an agency that you're shooting with needs to post images to social media during the night. I do that with clients on occasion, and it's not ideal, but there are pieces of technology that now enable us to do that, and one of those I'll actually show you in just a little bit. On bigger shoots, there's oftentimes a client, photo editor, creative director at the shoot, and a good chunk of their time is spent in front of the computer watching every image come in live as it's being shot. As turnaround times and budgets get more and more crunched, the importance of tethering has really grown that much more exponentially. On very simple shoots, sometimes a photographer is running the entire show, and on other shoots, a Digitech is dedicated to this job throughout the day. Simply put, a Digitech or digital technician is the person on set dedicated to running the transfer of digital images from the camera to computer for viewing, processing, organizing, and backing up files.
Yeah, sometimes sets can be very hectic, swarming with people, models, clients, you name it, makeup, everything. Essentially, a Digitech can be the buffer between the chaos, leaving the photographer to focus on the essential parts of the shoot.
And if something really does go wrong, Mike has to fix it. So it actually lets me concentrate on what I'm being hired to do, which is to take photos, and all the other stuff I can kind of like push onto him, but that's his role. He's the technical guru on the shoot that just makes sure that he enables me to stress out less and like know that that end of it is all being taken care of. So planning for client shoots. From the time a client call or email comes in, there's so many variables at play between then and when the shoot actually happens. From my end as the photographer, this includes, of course, a discussion with the client of the overall look and feel of that particular shoot, doing online research of the talent that I'm shooting. As a portrait photographer, oftentimes I get asked to shoot celebrities, musicians, whoever it is. So I generally speaking, I'm able to Google them and find information on them, look through a Wikipedia page. I try to look through photos as well and see how they've been photographed. Not necessarily to say I want to copy that, but it really helps to inform me of if they've been photographed well, if they've been photographed poorly. And seriously, I mean, there's certain people that tend to work well with different types of light versus others. It also helps to inform me reading articles about them and also looking at their photos as to what their personality is going to be like. Is somebody going to be interested in doing something quirky, or are they going to be really kind of stiff? And that really helps me as well in my preparation. Other things, of course, involve including booking talent, locations, assistants, hair and makeup, styling, digitechs. This can range from the most simple, show up and take a picture, which is rarely ever as simple as that may sound, to hiring a producer, a casting director for talent, applying for location permits from a city that you're shooting in, renting props from furniture to whatever it is, and the list goes on from there.
Yeah, like from a Digitech end, I'll usually get an email or a call from either a photographer or a producer, and planning for the shoot, I can build out, there's all variations of how we operate. But things that I usually like to know are, what cameras are going to be used, because that depends on the type of tether cable that we're bringing. And there's quirks of different camera brands, and size of the production and type of location. Beforehand, I'll also research the photographers to get an idea of their aesthetics. So, if I get to set and start color grading, it's similar to what they're going to be looking for. Mm-hmm. A couple other things before I begin building out the workstation the night before. I'll set up a capture session on both my computer and thumb drive that I'll bring to set, so I don't have to waste time in the morning setting up, so the photographer can jump on and quickly get to work without me wasting time. And if I've worked with that photographer before, I'll always save their previous settings and keep a couple of their color grades on hand if they want to work with that.
So as far as setting up client expectations leading into a shoot, there's lots of conversations that sometimes need to happen to make sure that everyone really is on the same page before the shoot actually even happens. This is all part of the pre-production process that goes into a shoot, and usually takes way more time than most people realize. As I said before, let me just hire you to come take a picture. Sometimes that works out, but generally speaking, the types of shoots that I get hired to shoot do involve some pre-production and some pre-planning and all of that. And if you don't do that, then oftentimes the photo ends up suffering for that. So one of the most important elements to locking in the overall look and feel of the shoot is often done with, in the industry, what are known as mood boards, as seen here. So this is an example of a mood board sent by a creative director for a recent shoot. Based on this general concept, we could then determine the type of location we wanted to shoot in, the necessary tools that we needed technically to be able to pull it off, and the direction of the styling, which are all obviously very important elements, which can very easily make or break a shoot if any of those things don't work out. Once on set and shooting light tests, the photographer, myself, can then collaborate with the Digitech and add a color grade that works with the overall art direction of the shoot, and sometimes even mock up layouts for the final production in real time. And when I say that, what I mean is like, there are situations where, say, you're shooting for a particular layout in a magazine or a cover, where the Digitech will actually have that cover on hand, and as the photos come in, it's actually real time being put into the layout, which can be really, really important, especially working with very tight deadlines and all of that. So as for hiring the right tech, above all, hiring and working with the Digitech is based on two factors to me, communication and trust. It's essential to work with a solid crew where everyone knows their specific role, works well with each other, has a positive attitude, and is 100% professional. The last thing any photographer wants is for a crew member to be, flirting with a model or saying something off color to a client. And we've all heard about these types of things happening on occasion. Fortunately, I haven't had that happen, but these things can happen. So you do really have to trust whoever you're with, because they're a reflection of who you are as a photographer and a brand and all of that. Certain roles on a crew, like a Digitech, tend to spend more time with your client than anyone else, in my opinion. And they have to know how to manage personalities and keep everyone happy. Some clients can truly be very demanding, and the Digitech needs to fulfill their needs quickly and smoothly while everyone's crowded around them, and really just keep their cool and be smiling, and they can't talk back to a client. They need to really keep their cool. If a Tether connection is lost or a computer goes down, the shoot is held up. All eyes are on the tech as the chief problem solver, and they need to be able to perform under an immense amount of pressure in those types of situations. So it's certainly not a job for everyone. Basically, if you've been known to crack under pressure, don't sign up to be a Digitech, hands down. Aside from a tech's interpersonal skills, you're trusting them with your images, capturing them, processing them, and backing them up in real time. Whether there's a massive shoot with lots of people and money on the line, or a smaller editorial shoot that you're doing, your livelihood is always on the line, and you have to feel really great about whoever you hire.
Yeah, a couple other things I should probably add is, if I was personally hiring a tech, I'd want to know also how long they've been a tech. Is this their first time trying it out, or they know Capture One? Have they actually teched? Who have they worked for? This is a really small industry, and a lot of the times you're going to know somebody. If you're a still life photographer, I'd want to know if they've teched on still life jobs. If they understand focus stacking software like Helicon, or they understand focus stacking in camera with cameras such as the Phase 1 XF. If they're familiar with fashion, etiquette or celebrity shoots. I'd also be curious to know if they are comfortable with high gamma monitors, because sometimes you'll get on a set at Milk Studios and there's already a couple stations set up and you have to jump on. And especially with high gamma monitors like ISOs, you need to know how to run the calibration software, which is pretty simple, but there's no time to figure that out in the morning. If a tech is Phase 1 Capture certified, is also a good confidence booster, but it's not necessarily everything.
Sort of like a photographer, you don't necessarily need a degree, but it's someone will ask you on occasion, and it's a good thing to have. And yeah, for me, I don't work with techs all the time, but when I do, it is a nice thing to know when I'm having that initial conversation with them. If they sort of let me know that they are certified, it's just okay, they've kind of done the schooling, they know how to problem solve. Because anyone can call themselves a photographer, anyone can call themselves a Digitech, an assistant, whatever, but it is really helpful to sort of know that they have a bit of schooling behind them.
Also, a couple things is if the tech has their own gear, and if they don't have their own gear, if they have the means of sub-renting it themselves, and also if they're comfortable jumping on existing machines. The role of the Digitech really can vary from shoot to shoot, and it really depends on a good tech adapting to the photographer's needs and preferences. For example, I have a shoot that shoots with a client that shoots with a medium format back, an IQ 260, with a Mamiya RZ, which is a manual focus camera. And his biggest concern is missing the focus, so I am literally mostly worried about that. And if there's a picture that's out of focus, I have to run up and tell him immediately. Sometimes it's important to have a tech because it's the first and only time everyone will be in the same room together. You know, between the client photographer and retoucher, it's the only time that everyone will be in the same room together, and it's great to have a solid color grade on premise, leaving a lot less unknowns in post, and it can also save time and money between the retoucher and the photographer or the client.
Just back and forth, yeah.
Yeah.
So the more you can get, I mean, the more you can get done in camera, the better, of course. The more you can get done on site, the less money there is to spend after the fact, and the happier you are, the happier the client is, and that's a good thing because that means you're going to get work again. A couple of other things as well, reviewing images. Sometimes the tech's job purely is to showcase and review the photographer's work with the client that may sometimes need to sign off on images while they're there on set before they leave. Organization is another huge thing. A Digitech can hand off a hard drive at the end of a shoot that's organized to the specifications of a client at the end of the day. This can be everything from custom naming conventions that certain companies or clients will have, organizations of files and shots, process TIFFs or JPEGs. They can print off contact sheets, which sometimes clients need as well, just to show all of, say, the different looks that have been shot, say, on a fashion shoot, storyboard creation and all that stuff. Managing the set as well, from my perspective, I think that that's a really huge advantage to having a tech, as well as just sort of training your crew on that if you're on a larger production, because sometimes they can be really chaotic, and having a tech with multiple monitors set up can really help to keep the client or creative director from overcrowding the set or the photographer. If I feel like a set's going to be particularly crazy, I'll sometimes strategize with my assistants and the tech before a shoot starts to make sure that everything stays under control. The more that they can keep everything orderly, the less stressed I am, and the more that I can do what I'm hired to do. Most importantly, a Digitech is a second set of eyes on the scene, helping catch anything at all that might go wrong. Any mistakes like a light stand in a shot, cutting off feet or hands, watching overexposure, underexposure, the histogram as a whole, looking for clipping highlights and shadows, and of course watching the focus like a hawk. I depend on a tech when I'm shooting really fast to let me know if something is not sharp, to let me know, if something is off in general. And you sort of you get into a zone with each other and you kind of correct things without making a big stink, and you do it very smoothly, and the client doesn't even know that anything's wrong, but you sort of get down a system with each other. And a good tech above all will take utmost care of your images, backing up your files and having solutions for any problems whatsoever that may arise.
Okay, digital checklist. As I mentioned before, I set up a capture session on a thumb drive and also on my computer. So basically just open it up, and I'm not fumbling around creating file structures or anything like that before I get to set. When I get to set, I'll check the camera and the equipment, just make sure nothing's damaged, or, because if something is damaged, you have to either rent it or figure it out quickly.
Very quickly.
So that's the first thing I check, is just for any damage. If I'm jumping on someone else's computer, I'll check through how fast the computer is, what size of the hard drive, how much space is there, how much RAM, is the dedicated hard drive going to be usable. And then I'll throw on, I have a little thumb drive with personal keyboard shortcuts for Capture One, and I have Workstation presets. So I just kind of set it up like it's my own computer. Let's see. I'll connect the camera to the computer quickly, just to take a couple test shots and make sure the cables are working and everything is running smoothly. And double check, the naming conventions and ICC profiles and curves, just to make sure that it's all consistent. And then I'll begin warming up calibrating the monitors. So if we're using ISO monitors, depending on the type of monitor, sometimes they need to warm up for 30 minutes if it's an older style that's not LED. So get those plugged in right away as well.
And you don't want to calibrate a monitor while it's still cool. You want to wait for it to warm up so the colors are going to be where they actually should be. You never want to calibrate a cold monitor.
I'll then begin positioning my workstation to be completely out of the way, as close to the photographer as possible. So I'll either talk with the photographer or I'll move, which sometimes can be a lot of stuff. It can be a whole, cart and cords, and I try to organize it because I don't want to be the guy with cords everywhere, and I try to be as organized as possible because there's also lighting gear that's coming in, and I try to get set up, in a good spot that I'm out of the way of the other assistants and the photographer, and that we're ready to go, and I'll have a monitor ready to go for the photographer, so if he wants to take a picture, it's ready for him to view. After everything is secured, I'll start securing the camera connections, and so I'll go over this later, but there's a couple different tether block or jerk stopper that secures the USB or FireWire to the camera without it either ruining your camera or pulling out and you step on it. I'll go over that in a little bit. I'll run through the backups. So I use a program called ChronoSync, which is a very easy program, and it's a great program. And it's, I'll set that up with a couple different hard drives, and I'll go over this in a little bit. And then after we begin testing the lighting, I'll pull out a gray card and do a quick white balance check. And as we start shooting, I'll begin putting on a color grade, or begin testing usually. As we were shooting, I'm watching both the focus, and I usually look for eyes, or depending on the situation. And then I'm also watching the histogram. So for example, Drew really likes to shoot dark, and it stresses me out a little bit as a tech. But it's Drew's personal preference, and so once you kind of understand how this photographer works, and Drew's not going to be, pulling the shadows completely out, and Drew really gets things set really well in a lot of ways in camera.
Thanks. Yeah. So. As far as something, his concern obviously is from the technical perspective of, I don't want to lose any detail in the shadows or the highlights. My perspective is, he wants to be able to have that latitude to bring those out after the fact and make sure that as much information that is on that sensor is actually translating into this file. My perspective is, generally speaking, I try to have things pretty well dialed in camera to a pretty complete and finalized look. So if something is dark and there is lost information in these shadows, that's fine because that's how I lit it. But not everybody works like that. So it's sort of like he's going to play devil's advocate with me and make sure that trying to push me to do things that it's more a technically well-rounded file, whereas I tend to shoot things a little bit darker, a little more moody. Not everything, but when I'm in the studio, a lot of the work that I do tends to be in that style. So so we sort of have this back and forth, but he'll tell me when something's off, or also with the tech, if I'm on set and something is a little bit dark, he'll oftentimes, because he can control from the computer, he'll oftentimes say, open up a third of a stop or a half a stop, something like that, just to sort of correct my, I'll call it an error.
It's not an error.
So as far as in studio versus on location, they're two entirely different beasts. In a studio, there's generally more room to go large. And that can certainly be an advantage when working within the confines of a studio space. There's a hair and makeup area normally, wardrobe area, potentially multiple setups being built at once, and consistent control over the environment. However, if I'm working alone or on a very small shoot, sometimes a tethering option as simple as this can be the perfect setup. This is nothing more than a camera wirelessly tethered directly into a tablet using Tether Tools' new Case Air. It's a tiny little unit that's up on a camera that I have up front here that I'll show you a little bit later. And that's actually, the tablet is mounted via a product they have called the AeroTab Universal Tablet Mount. This can also really easily work as a wired tethered setup if you're using a Surface or other tablet that has a USB port. I use an iPad, so I'm not able to plug a camera directly into it, but this is a really good, very, very simple, inexpensive option for wireless tethering. A setup as simple as this really helps you or a client to be able to see what's being shot on a much larger screen than a camera's LCD and is a great solution that's really, really simple and lightweight. Oftentimes, a Tether setup involves incorporating a laptop into the equation. This obviously provides a lot more processing power than a tablet ever could provide. Of course, a larger screen, and it enables you to transfer raw files much more easily. As large of a capacity of a tablet, or as much processing power as a tablet can have, even in this current day and age, they're not really great at handling raw files, especially like I shoot with Nikon D810s. They're pretty large files. They're 34, 36 megapixel files, somewhere in there. And those raw files are pretty massive, bordering almost like a medium format file would be. So to try to push something like that into like an iPad or even an iPad Pro or a Surface is not gonna work. It's not gonna work so well. You're gonna have a lot of issues. So in those situations, I will be shooting, generally speaking, RAW and JPEG small. And then when I'm transferring over to the iPad or other tablet would be a very small JPEG, not the raw files, just to help to speed up the process and all of that. So yeah, and in this setup that you see in this picture here, the laptop is on another Tether Tools product that they have called the Aero table, along with a secure strap, which is just an elastic strap to make sure that the laptop is totally safe from me being clumsy, which I, generally speaking, am.
Okay, I'll go over a couple of the different sizes of workstations and why we call it like maybe a workstation. It's probably a weird term, but
it's a workstation. It's pretty.
Yeah.
It's substantial.
So this is another tech in New York City named George Brooks. This is his cool-looking station. Basically, like, why would you want something this big when you could have a laptop? In a studio, sometimes you're in a very big studio and there's a lot of people, and Drew's stressed out, we got to the shoot late, or, for an example, Drew's not stressed out, someone else is stressed out. The art director is very stressed out, and Drew doesn't want to be around the art director. I'm making the worst examples here. Basically, you're able to separate a crowd of people, which it can be quite big, and having a viewing monitor and a tech, navigating, reviewing the images as a photographer shooting saves a lot of time, because the photographer can be sitting on a stool or in a studio setting and watching the images come through, and he can also navigate the screen from where he is without going back and running back and forth between the Digitech and the photographer. Mm-hmm. There's also reasons to be shooting in studio. If you're shooting on a 100 megapixel phase 1 camera and the client wants TIFFs at the end of the day, you're going to need a bigger processing power than a MacBook Pro. So you're going to want more cores and you're going to want more RAM to handle those large files.
And it might sound dumb, but there are certain types of shoots, larger advertising campaigns or fashion shoots, where I don't want to say it's like the dog and pony show, but you do kind of have to pull out all the stops to, even if you're shooting with, without a medium format. If I'm shooting with a Nikon body that produces sizable files, but that a laptop can totally handle, sometimes there are situations where I'll have Mike bring the whole setup because it looks cooler, because it makes the client feel better. As crazy as that might sound, it can be completely overkill, but sometimes that is the way to go. Just really, you have to gauge it based on the scale of the production and sort of gauge it and build it up or down from there. Yep.
Another thing is where you, oh, sorry.
For those like when you are in the state outside, right? So what kind of monitor you use? Are those professional photo monitor or
Repeat.
general computer monitor? And what's your thoughts?
So when
the
we're
question
shooting,
is,
yep, go for it.
what monitors we're using and if they're professional monitors. And yeah, that's a great question. So we do. We use, these are ISO monitors. They're high gamut. So for print, it's great to use high gamut monitors because it's a full Adobe RGB spectrum, which is great because it's basically the same gamut as print, so CMYK.
If you're shooting for web, I mean, you of course always want to have a great monitor that's calibrated, that has as large of the Adobe, as large of an area of the Adobe RGB color space as possible. Basically what that means is there's sRGB monitors, which is essentially the compressed color space. It's representing so many less colors in the spectrum of all the colors that we see than the full Adobe RGB spectrum. So print, when you're shooting something for print, it's essential to have a higher end monitor that enables you to be so much more color accurate to get it as close to what you're actually going to see in the printed format, than you would say on the web. Yep.
We use a lot of ISO, like the ISO actual brand name is because a lot of rental houses have them. And so I keep them because it's the same software throughout. So we just use, so I can rent additional ISOs like these two we actually got from Adorama, so we didn't have to bring them in today. These are 4K color edge ISO monitors, and they're great.
And thanks to Adorama Rentals for hooking us up with some. They gave us the monitors in this crazy digital cart here that we have the gear on up here, which we'll get to in a little bit. So they're right across the street on 17th, and they have a ton of great gear. So definitely, if you ever do need to rent some stuff.
Another reason to use these monitors and to have it calibrated is if you send work to a retoucher, you want to make sure that they're seeing the same screen that you have at home. So you want to make sure that it's the same color balance, 6500K or 5500K depending on the print. And you want to make sure that you're talking with your retoucher in the same language, like, so they're not messing up your color grade. I'm going to go through a couple different location, workstations because it can really vary between what we bring to set. Here I'm using a Seaport case, but a couple.
That guy down there. Right?
Yeah, it's right here. And there's a couple of reasons to use this, but mostly it's to have it on a stand. And so there's a couple other companies that make really nice cases. One of them is Digiplate. But I personally and Ultex are different. Sorry about that. I prefer to use tripod legs and floor monitor stands compared to traditional carts on location because I like the ability to move fast, not hold up the crew between moves, which allows more time to test and gives the photographer plenty of time to review the images. A lot of the times we are on locations without external power, and so I need to bring enough power packs to power all the computers and monitors on set. If we have a Mac Pro, we will need a generator to power that. Yeah. But yeah, keep in mind that photo sets can sometimes run past 10 hours, and you need to be prepared. You can't run out of power, at hour 10. You have to be prepared. And you also have to keep in mind that external hard drives, and when you're processing heavy files, it also is using a lot more power than you would imagine on a normal day. So if you have a MacBook Pro and you're used to having 4 hours of battery life out of it, I would expect 2 hours out of it. You want to prepare to have multiple hard drives powering off of that. Also, another thing is, you have to be prepared for extreme weather. Just because it's raining doesn't mean the shoot's going to be canceled. In this case, we were shooting on Coney Island, and it was extremely windy, and there was sand just blowing into my workstation. And I ended up having to gaff tape a silicone keyboard protector on the top of the keyboard and taped gaff over every port and over the speaker grates. Here we are on a boat. In a situation like this, you have to make some hard decisions and problem solve quickly. Because we were rocking so heavily on this boat, my cart and tripod setup were not stable enough while rigged to the mast. So in the end, I ended up working seated on the floor with my Seaport case, covered in a duvetine because it was spraying water overboard.
And just to throw this out there real quick, some of these scenarios might sound crazy, but people ask for crazy things sometimes, and it's our job to go and capture them. And sure, we all love our cameras, but they're just a tool to take a photo. And I used to work with Joe McNally, who has fried more cameras than anybody you could probably ever imagine via water or sand or grit, whatever. And these things happen. I mean, you could baby your gear and you can play it safe, or you can decide to go in and get something a little crazy. But I would put it out there that some of these situations where we're really taxing our gear end up bringing out some of the best work sometimes. Not always, maybe. You got to be smart about your gear, but there are some situations where you kind of just have to say, you know what, screw it. I'm going to do everything I can to take care of my gear, but the photo comes first, and I need to make sure that I'm going to get that photo. So,
as a Digitech, though, you have to make decisions based on your gear too, and you have to
course.
try as much as you can to help. But these are computers, and there's only so much you can do to completely cover.
Technology doesn't like sand
Yeah,
or
these weren't designed
water
like a camera. So,
at all.
Yeah. Here's a case of, this is a great case of shooting without a permit. We were shooting in the subway, New York City subway, for a fashion magazine, and we were unable to get a permit to shoot in the subway. We couldn't have any cords, tripods, or anything that would disrupt New York City commuters. And of course, you all know that you don't mess with commuters. We shot to card with an assistant running cards back throughout the day. The art director and I sat on a bench outside the subway station with a radio communicating feedback between the photographer. So it was great. The art director and some of the other clients from the magazine were able to review the images as the photographer was shooting, and we could radio down feedback on some of the clothes and various other things. So it ended up working out pretty well. And it's amazing that the radios were actually working between some of the stations, which is pretty amazing.
Cool.
Here's another location. Even though we were trying to keep things as light as possible, this is for a Hollywood Reporter job. The client requested that we needed the 27-inch high gamut monitor because we were shooting for print, and they wanted to make sure that we were getting the color grade set because there was like a 2-day turnaround for this job. So in this case, I brought a 27-inch ISO on a floor stand, so I didn't have to bring a whole cart and everything because it was unsure where we were going to be shooting this. And because of that, I didn't know if we were going to have power, so I brought along a couple of Vagabond external batteries, which you can power a monitor off of for around 4 hours each. So I think I brought 3, but they're great. They're made by Policy Buff. And in the past, we used to rent generators, and I just wanted to talk about the difference between a generator and a battery, and how simple batteries can be after dealing with generators for so many years. It's really amazing, especially in New York, to not have to deal with generators on the streets. And yeah, battery packs have really changed kind of the way things are moving along for us.
So, wait, hold on.
What's
What's happening here? I don't know, but let's continue. Sorry, a little bit of a glitch. Oh, okay,
Yeah,
got
just had a
it.
double.
We're good.
That was nice.
Our bad.
Okay. When things hit the fan.
Yes, as just happened.
Yeah. Basically, I always be prepared for the worst case scenario. When I'm packing for a job, I always prepare everything I can think of. I think of I bring the kitchen sink if I can. If I have room, I'll bring extra cord of every single thing that I think we will be using, and even more. So if photographers shooting with a Canon Mark IV, I will bring three versions of a Tether cable for 3.0. But the photographer might have a backup camera that's a Mark III or something else. So I will bring USB 2 cables as well, because obviously those two don't work together. When problems come up on set, I usually try to solve as many problems before letting the photographer client know there is a problem. I don't want to stress out the photographer, and I want to keep everyone, I want to keep the shoot sane and not bring up the stress level, because they can be very stressful. If a serious situation does arise, it's good to devise a solution and calmly let the crew know that you have you'll need a couple minutes to work out a solution. I think that's great advice. And
Yes.
Yeah. I save all support numbers. It's great to have phase 1 support or other tech numbers you trust support if you are a tech. And if you're renting, I always keep the rental house numbers plugged into my phone, so you don't have to be running back, looking through a call sheet where this equipment came from. I want to be able to call Adorama right away and figure out what was wrong with the digital back that we rented. I keep a backup thumb drive with copies of programs, including backdated versions of Capture One. I keep Capture One 8, 9, and 10 at the moment. Google is your friend. If you don't have Wi-Fi, you can create a hotspot from your phone and start Googling away, and it's amazing what you can figure out. Also, things happen. For example, I was on another ad job shoot with the same photographer that I began teching with when my computer was knocked over in the Seaport case. It was quite a big shoot, and we had a lot of different elements to it that we would not have been able to redo. We had various muscle cars that came, and classic
you were
cars.
Shooting on the...
We were on the Williamsburg Bridge, and if we had to redo that shoot, we would have had to redo a lot of stuff that couldn't. We would have had to re-rent these classic cars and models that came for a couple different hours at a time. Basically, my computer sprawled out, an assistant tripped over a cord, and everyone was looking at me, and it was not a good situation. And 8 minutes later, I was able to load up a version of Capture One from a thumb drive that I have in my pocket at all times on the art director's extra MacBook that he had in his backpack, and plugged in my SSD backup, and we were up and running within 8 minutes. And I think that's
It's impressive.
Yeah, and well, I'll go to the next slide, but it's like sometimes problems will happen that are beyond your control. Here's an example of a photographer shooting with a 5DS, which is a 50 megapixel camera, and he was shooting on burst mode. And
never advisable while tethered, ever.
Basically, Apple computers at the moment, MacBook Pros, any laptops made by Apple have the limit for RAM is 16 gigs, and it's a little bit of a problem for us, Digitech, because there's times where you do hit the RAM buffer, and you have to know enough to let the photographer know that he will either need to slow down or shoot to card, and let him know the limitations of shooting to a laptop. We were able to just slow down and start shooting again, but it's good to kind of, over time, you begin understanding your computer and how fast things are and different variations of software. But it's good to understand that, I think early in my career, if this would have happened with the computer, because it was just crashing my Capture One, and I've dealt with this problem a couple times before, so I knew enough that that was what it was. It was just too big of files running into your computer at once.
That all comes with experience.
But I think early in my career, I would have just assumed that it was my fault and let the photographer continue crashing the machine. If you're shooting to medium format backs, there's a lot of more problems that can occur. This is where the Phase 1 capture certification course was really valuable. A good tech should be able to look at a corrupt image and diagnose what the problem is. For example, like a CCD overheating on a Phase 1 back has a certain look. It's real grainy, and it's hanging shutter and sync issues. If you're syncing a Nikon camera to over 250 of a second, you'll start to see a
little black line on the bottom of the frame.
Yeah. Let's see. The biggest problem that I deal with on a daily basis, though, is camera connections. There's a lot of different reasons for camera connection problems, but
it's usually me tripping over a cord.
Yeah.
That's I would say the biggest issue that I've personally had with tethering that he's sort of helped to whip me into shape, getting better with, and not being so damn clumsy on set. But yeah, it can range anything from that to software glitch to a loose cable. But all those things are, that's why he's here to diagnose and fix those problems. Mm-hmm. From my perspective, it's essential to have that same attitude, to hope for the best, but be prepared for and expect the absolute worst case scenario. This keeps you from getting lazy, and as we all know, that one time that you actually do slack ends up being the time when it really kind of kicks your ass. That's when everything that could possibly go wrong goes wrong. So this is just a quick time lapse of a pretty typical shoot. This is a celebrity type of portrait shoot that I oftentimes get assigned to shoot. When a client tells you that you'll be shooting in a fancy hotel room, I think the common person might think that it's really, really cool. It sounds cool anyway. So from my perspective, it's oftentimes borderline a nightmare situation. The room is almost always too small. You don't have the ceiling height that you need to set up lights. There's normally like really bad tacky artwork that's like actually glued to the walls. And oftentimes because of the clients I'm shooting for, I can't include any of that artwork in the photos because of potential copyright infringement. And these are all things that you have to think about. So in light of that, I almost always come prepared with a roll of seamless. And this means that I can then turn whatever location or room that I'm working in into a full-on like legit photo studio. That's exactly what I did here. This was actually with the Hunger Games cast a couple years ago for the release of one of the new Hunger Games movies. So whether working alone or with an assistant or a Digitech, it's so important that everyone on the crew is a really great problem solver more than anything else. As a photographer, my primary goal, as I've said before and I'll say again, is really to take great photos. And the best kind of problem that I can have on set when I'm working with a crew is the problem that they diagnose, fix without me even knowing it, and then tell me after the shoot's done. Because then I'm not stressed, I'm doing exactly what I need to be doing. So I wish all problems were like that. Unfortunately, they're not, but it's nice when that does happen. Tools of the trade.
All right. So obviously, we're using Apple computers. It seems to be, I've only Digiteched actually once on a Windows machine, and it was a really interesting day.
Yeah.
It was on a Windows Surface, and you could actually touch it, and you could use the loop, and you could touch the eyeball, and it worked.
Okay.
You could scroll, and it worked fine, but it was nowhere near the speed of what I'm used to working on a Mac. But I think it's something that might start coming up more. But personally, almost every tech that I know uses an Apple. I don't actually know any techs.
Yeah, but it is all, of course, personal preference. You need to, of course, like go along with the industry standards, but some people prefer Mac, some people prefer PC, and that's fine. But
and Capture One does work great on a Windows machine.
Good to know.
Yeah. Personally, as a tech, 95% of the time we're using Capture One, but there's a couple other great programs that you can use, like Lightroom, to tether with a camera. If you have a Hasselblad camera, Focus is also...
That's their software?
It's their software, yeah. Let's see. Backing up files, I use ChronoSync. It's pretty widespread in the fashion industry, but Drew uses...
Yeah, there's another program called SuperDuper. That's what I use for real-time backups. I think it's some really tiny company. I think they're called Shirt Pocket that makes this little software. Basically what it does, and I think it's very similar to ChronoSync in that it enables you to do like what they call smart updates. So if I take one hard drive that I want to then essentially clone to another hard drive, so I do that, say, after the first setup, it clones everything from this drive to this second drive. And then throughout the day, when I click copy again, what I mean by smart update is that it doesn't recopy everything. It just changes the files that have been updated or added since that point, and just copies those over. So it's a really good piece of software. I think both ChronoSync and SuperDuper are both pretty inexpensive and just really great tools to have, even for home backups. I use those as well for my personal archives. So really simple to use and definitely something to jot down.
Still use Photoshop quite a bit. Creating storyboards and quickly retouching samples on set. Also printing contact sheets on set. I use Photoshop, a decent amount still, but I think Capture One right now is kind of
I would say for like sort of
a lot of
the
color
higher
grading.
end industry standard, Capture One has kind of become the norm in a way for tethering, and for a lot of retouchers use it for color grading and all of that. But again, like we're not here, we're really not here to sell you anything. We're here to kind of educate you and present a bunch of options your way, because this is all personal preference. So if you like one thing, great. If you hate one thing, that's fine too. But just trying to tell you a bunch from our own personal experience. But yeah, Capture One has been pretty standard across the industry the last couple of years.
So I think right now, I think maybe I'll just go over what I bring to set and a couple different tools that are very useful.
Sure.
what I show up with on set and reasons for bringing those tools. So,
should we jump out in front here, I
yeah.
suppose?
Yeah,
We can kind of just go through what's here and we can go back and forth.
yeah.
Feedback, we good? Maybe, kind of, sort of?
Should we move this stuff back?
I think we're all right. You can hear us still? No feedback?
good.
All right. Excellent. So we just have sort of a table of a bunch of random gizmos and gadgets that we take with us on set. I guess I'll start while you're unpacking some of that stuff.
Yeah.
Hard drives, of course. There's a ton of different manufacturers, of course. I tend to use, and you can speak to this as well, I'm sure, but solid state hard drives. The prices have dropped on them quite a bit over the last couple of years. A solid state hard drive doesn't have all of the spinning parts that a traditional hard drive has, like hard drives in our older desktop computers would have. So it's basically this, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think basically the same technology as an SD card, essentially solid state. So there's no spinning disks or anything like that, so it can withstand falls. It's what? Flash memory, yeah, okay. So it can essentially withstand falls, and it can take a lot more wear and tear, and it's a hell of a lot faster too than any type of spinning hard drive. So for me, not necessarily from the teching perspective, but when I'm traveling, my main hard drive that I'm downloading to and editing off of is a solid state drive. It's a 1 terabyte solid state, and that enables me to have a bunch of recent jobs with me, say if I'm traveling, but also have hopefully a substantial amount of free space as well, because the more free space you have left on a hard drive, the faster and more efficient it's going to work. And then I use these guys as well. These are Thunderbolt and USB 3.0 drives. These are not solid state, but they're also really fast and dependable. Is this guy solid state?
That's spinning, actually.
Spinning,
Yeah.
all right. But again, just another option as well. These are Digitechs. This is a Lacey. There's a ton of other brands out there as well. And there's no hard drive company that somebody can't tell you a disaster story about. Everyone has their favorites and says that one's never failed me, but at some point it will, because that's how technology works, right? But I have had really good luck with Digitech over the years. And that's my archive at home. My RAID system is Digitech as well. So that's what I've also used in the field. I have a couple of these guys in a solid state as well, and that's served me well. So that's my perspective.
Yeah, I love Digitech. Yeah, I love these little rugged Lacey's too, though. These are cheap. You can get these for under $100 for 500 gig, and I think they're great, quick backups. And then they're, if you're not using it to work off of, it's a great backup. Mm-hmm. However, when I'm on set, I always want to have a solid state backup on a portable drive, because if something did happen, I want to be able to plug it into another computer and quickly get that session onto another computer fast. And it's a little more reliable. If I drop a spinning drive, there's a chance that you could corrupt it just by dropping it. And I've had a lot better luck with solid state drives. It's amazing how much abuse they can get. Do you have your solid state Digitech
I don't
here?
have that here.
Okay.
It's somewhere back there. We have tons of gear with us here. As far as...
I think I'll just go over something and you can dig it out.
Sure.
Okay. A couple things I think I always have been bringing lately is, where is it? A light meter. I think it's great to have your own light meter. There's times where you get on set and you'll see a problem. That's a really small one. It always lives in my case. But you never completely have control over the lights as a tech, but there's times where you can see something that went wrong. Like maybe the fill went down, there's a bitube and something's down. And things start getting more contrasty, and you're asking the assistant, is that power set? And you want to be able to quickly go out and see what the power is, just to make sure that, you can see it in screen, but there's times where it's really nice to know exactly the power of each light that's firing.
As far as cables, we have lots and lots of cables here. I guess we'll get to that in a minute, though.
Yeah, what do we...
We have lots of cables here. There's so many different ways to tether. But do you want to start with some of the basic USBs and extenders and all that stuff?
Yeah. Okay. This is one of my favorite cables recently. As you can see, what is it called, right angle cable.
Yep.
It keeps the cable, because you have to plug a USB cord into the slot of the camera, and it actually is really amazing to keep it out of the way so it's not sticking out. Because a lot of times, if I'm teching, I'll notice the photographer like leans it against their body, and you'll see the connection go in and out because it's putting pressure on this port. And the last thing you want to do is ruin the port in your camera, which happens over time, and it's a common situation, and it's expensive to fix. But you want to protect this port as much as possible. I mean, they're durable, but this is getting plugged in and out a lot. So I like to use the Tether block, which is now Tether Tools, which is cool. But I like to use this in this situation if the photographer is going to be unplugging and plugging in a lot of times. So I want to save their port from getting abuse. And this is a really nice situation. So we have like all these cables here, but I use a USB 3 extension cable, and I like to just have that as that connection. There's a couple other things you can do though.
As far as the tether block, which you just mentioned on the bottom of this camera,
Yeah.
which is really, really cool to me because it's solid. It's actually screwed into the bottom of the camera. Your cord is not going to rip out of the camera and kill your USB port. And it's really kind of a foolproof solution. Aside from that, though, another great option, the Tether Tools introduced, I don't know how many years ago, but it's sort of become a standard. I've used it a ton. Everybody uses these. They're called jerk stoppers. Basically, as the USB cord plugs into the camera, you basically have, this is actually flipped, but you basically have a connector here that plugs into this. So the cord is actually strapped to your camera. So therefore, when you actually pull on it, it's pulling against the camera. It's not pulling the cord and then losing your capture session. So another really great tool. And then just to show you real quick while he's grabbing some other stuff, as far as the wireless solution goes that I was mentioning before, the case air unit, that's simply this guy right here. It's really tiny. The cool thing is you can have it either on your camera's hot shoe, or you can, if you have, say, a Pocket Wizard or a ProPhoto Air remote unit or something like that on top, you can just have it strapped off your camera just like that. And this has both an iPad and an iPhone app. So this enables you to send images directly to your iPad, and you can actually control all your camera settings from it as well. So there's a bunch of cool things, like if I'm on a really simple shoot and I'm just shooting on a basic tripod, I can then just clamp this right to the tripod or to a light stand, something like that. If it's just me working alone, I just shot this and it transfers, I know I'm glaring right in your face, transfers the photo right to here. You can go through and review all the images. You can actually change your camera settings. You can actually go into live view from here. So you can do everything. So it's great for like if someone's doing products or still life or something like that. A great solution. Again, you're not really able to transfer your raw files. This is a situation where you're essentially using this as a means to review your files, right? So you're able to look through, do a basic edit, make sure your exposure and composition and all of that, and white balance and everything is spot on. You can make adjustments right from here, but again, it's not something that you're gonna say download your raw files and then edit right here. But a great solution that is kind of a no-brainer to me. And if you look at the size of screens, it's quite a substantial difference, and I think there's really no excuse to do something like this because it's really going to change the way that you shoot. I will say as well, tethering in general, whether it's wired or wireless, I think we kind of talked about this a little bit, but it does slow you down. And you could look at that as in a negative way, but I would actually look at it in a very positive way. I think most of us tend to overshoot, right? And doing this actually, you're forced to do things in camera. You see it on a big screen, and the tether, whether it's wireless or wired, you're not able to shoot and say continuous high like you could if you're out on the street somewhere doing a lifestyle shoot. You're constrained by the powers of the computer and transmitting raw files and all of that. But by slowing us down, it actually makes us work harder to produce better photos. So I think that that's actually a great advantage. Another step, once you, sort of the next step up from this wireless solution, would then be doing something, a wired solution using something, if I can get this back on here. Oh, I won't put that back. Oops, that's all right. Basically a wired solution into a laptop like I showed you. This guy right here is the Tether Tools Aero table. It's basically like an aircraft aluminum table, super lightweight, super durable. I've had this for probably like 6 years. Laptop goes right on here, and you have this strap that basically just goes right over the top of the keyboard where the screen is and keeps it from falling off. So it's really, really lightweight, easy to use, and it's another really great simple setup. And then from there, we move on to like the craziness that is over here. But any other, do you want to talk about the extension or any of the active repeaters or anything?
I was just going to quickly, I see the list here, and
Sure.
our things got...
We have a lot of
we
things
showed up
here.
pretty with a ton of stuff, and it's not as organized as it could be. Anyway, a couple things I always bring is I always want to have a color calibrator with me, and the i1 display is one of my favorites, but this is made by X-Rite, and then there's also a Spider 5, which is really nice too. The color balance is close, and I always want to have that just because I never know if there's, I want to make sure that every monitor that you're looking at is as consistent as possible. It's never perfect with an Apple screen versus an ISO, but you want to have it as close as possible. And a couple of other things that I might bring is, I want to have backup hard drives. I want to at least have one for the shoot computer. I'm bringing adapters and dongles. Like I have a P-style Phase 1 back, and especially also I should mention the MacBook, the new MacBook Pro has all USB-C, connectors. So you're always going to have these dongles, and it's just something you deal with. But you always want to have backups of these because they do fail. But this is an interesting because this camera is FireWire 400 to 800, and then I have another adapter to Thunderbolt, and just kind of waiting to see what happens with the new MacBook Pros, because a lot of techs have stayed away from the new MacBook Pros, and we're kind of waiting for things to kind of work itself out, even though they're great computers. I always want to have extra cards, card readers, batteries, cleaning solution. If the photographer's shooting on medium format, I want to bring cleaning solution and wipes to clean the back of a medium format sensor versus a 35mm sensor. iPhone charger and battery. This is an amazing thing to have as an assistant because someone's going to need this, and this is a really nice thing to have. Boombox. It's amazing having music on set, and if you show up with a boombox, people are always really excited. Gaff tape, multiple colors. Photographer usually has black and other colors, but it's great to have other colors, just especially when you have gear mixing in with studio gear versus mixing in with photographer's gear. I try to label everything of mine, so when the chaos at the end of the day separates and I'm working on the computer, that the assistant doesn't accidentally give my super clamp back to someone else, and I want to try to collect as much of my stuff as possible.
And also safety. If I'm booming out a light stand, for instance, I'll always make sure that the end that's boomed out, where there's a piece of metal maybe sticking around eye height that someone could very easily walk into, I'll put like a piece of fluorescent pink or green gaff tape. I'll just loop it around the end and hang it down, so it's very obvious that there's something there. If you're tired at the end of the day, it's really easy to walk into a black light stand that's hanging out there in the studio. So safety first on set always, and gaff can be really helpful for that as well.
Leatherman, super useful. Even if you're not an assistant or a tech, it's an amazing tool to have. We've had to open a computer before with this, and yeah, it's just extremely useful. A couple other things is extra sync cords, and then as far as tethering goes, you want to be prepared for this. So generally, you don't want to tether more than 15 feet with USB 3 without adding power to the equation. So different computer manufacturers and different computers, for example, like an iMac versus a MacBook Pro, are putting out different voltages through the USB port. And so basically, Tether Tools came in years ago and built the Tether Boost. Where is that? The original. Here? I'm looking for the original.
The original, I couldn't tell you.
Here it is. And this thing changed a lot of things, because when the D800 came out years ago, there was major problems with it disconnecting. And this was the first thing that I knew of that would regulate the power, and the D800 was all of a sudden was working.
I wish I knew about that when I had.
Yeah.
Well,
Basically, Tether Tools updated it with this, which is really nice because you used to have a little brick, and to power it, I had a Tether Tools battery.
it's around.
Oh, here it is. That would come with it. So this is really useful. If you're having signal problems with your camera, it seems to be going in and out, I'll throw this on right at the base of the camera, or at the computer, and connect it to a 15-inch cord, and usually that solves it. And if it seems to be, we're still having problems, I'll add the power, which just adds a little extra signal strength to the cord. And that usually fixes like majority of signal strength problems. However, a lot of the times a photographer wants to be farther away from the station. Sometimes he's on a huge cyc and he can't be 15 feet away from me. And so that's where this really comes in handy, because I always want this connected to a 15 feet cable as close to the camera as possible. And then I'll add extensions behind it towards the computer. So you can go up to like 48 feet at this point.
Which is more than most people need.
Yeah, but to do that, you need to have this connected to power pack. So a lot of the times, I'll connect these three, and I'll use where's the strap more?
Right here.
And I'll strap this on, and this is made by Tether Tools, it's called Strapmore. And this is called a Tether Boost Pro 3.0. And I'll strap it to my monitor, external monitor floor stand, which is closest to the photographer, which gives the photographer 15 feet away from the floor stand, which ends up working out really well. And then this is not dangling from the floor or getting dragged, and it goes right here, and I'll strap it right there. This has been extremely useful for having long cords and I don't know, yeah. Anything else?
Obviously, extra batteries, battery chargers, all of that stuff. A card reader is always an essential thing to have on my end as well as on a tech's end. There are times like the shoot that Mike showed you when he and an art director was sitting outside a subway station and the photographer was running cards back and forth because they didn't have a permit, they weren't able to be in the subway. So it's important to have a card reader. And just because things do happen, technology always will have issues. That's just the nature of technology. It always kicks us when we're down, but you know, you need to have backups of everything, and a great card reader is very important as well.
And you want to have a backup card reader too, because the
And a backup
pens
card
can
reader.
get
I've had,
destroyed
just
if
to throw this out there, I've had, with this actual card reader, I normally travel with 3 of them. I had 2 break on me in a single night, where the pins inside of here, when I put a CF card in, and I wasn't like jamming it in there, but the CF card's bent. And I had just finished a shoot, it was like 1 in the morning, I was in a hotel, and I needed to turn around and edit by 9 a.m. to get sent out to press. And thank God I had 3 card readers with me, which sounds like overkill. You might think of, oh, a backup being 2. Not necessarily, so just something to throw out there, a little bit of wisdom.
Also, MacBook Pro batteries. These are extremely useful. There's a couple different brands that make these, but these will save your life if you're on the field and you don't know if you're going to have power. Versa makes one, which is flat, which can sit under your computer in a case. But rule of thumb, these get really hot, and you always want to separate it from your computer if possible, especially in New York City during the summer months. You want to make sure. If it's winter, it's fine. You can throw it right under it.
It'll only help
But
you out.
I think we should set up a session real quick.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do that. Which computer? You want to go over here, right?
Here.
Apologies, there was another class right before ours that let out that was like a live shoot situation, so there was a lot going on here right before you all came in.
Monitor, power bank, battery for the monitor.
Yeah.
The question was, do we have a battery for the monitor itself?
Looks like.
And what that looks like? That's a good question.
Yeah, I didn't bring one. They're a little bigger. It's called a Vagabond, and they're made by Policy Buff, which some of you might remember, like Alien Bees, like there's like kind of a commercial, like a consumer lights. But Pulsey Buff makes a battery pack that converts AC to DC power, and you can swap the batteries, and yeah, it's basically, it just looks like a big battery, and you can plug in anything into it.
Why don't we jump, we'll set up a tether session
Yeah.
while we're doing that. You want to go into, I hear an alarm. The Sony alarm. Do you want to get this guy going?
Sure. Well,
All right.
we'll show your session first, and then jump in.
That's fine.
Okay.
Any questions while he's setting that up in the meantime? Yes, sir.
Yeah. You obviously have a lot of cameras.
Uh-huh.
Okay. For a portable hard drive,
Uh-huh.
do you have a portable hard drive for each camera or various types of computers?
The question is, do we have portable hard drive for each camera or various computers, essentially?
Or
So essentially, when I'm on set or traveling, I generally speaking travel with 3 hard drives. So I always have 3 copies of my work wherever I am, just because I like to have, I don't want to call it excess redundancy. I think the more redundancy, the better. If I could realistically have more than that, I probably would. But I get down as far as thinking about worst case doomsday scenarios. The hotel gets broken into, the hotel burns down. I literally will make sure, if I'm on a big job, I'll make sure that I have a copy, my assistant has a copy. If we
Separate.
are leaving the hotel for the day, for a second day of shooting, or we're going out somewhere, I'll keep a copy with me. So there's a copy in the hotel and there's another copy with me. Because until a job is physically in the client's hands and delivered, you have that liability. And that's a very scary thing to me. So I'm big on redundancy. It's incredibly important. And again, like, you just have to expect that technology will fail because nothing is perfect. So yeah, I mean, these guys, as I said, I have, this is my, I have everything numbered. This is number 1. I have 1 through 3. And then I also even have, I guess I travel with 4 hard drives. I have another hard drive that is a bootable backup of my laptop. Therefore, if my laptop hard drive were to go down, I could install a new hard drive and then boot it up from a backup that I have with me on the road as well. Another question? Yep.
Trying to back up remotely on the cloud.
Have I tried to back up remotely on the cloud? Unsuccessfully. I think it's great for, say, our iPhone or other smartphone camera rolls, but when you're actually talking about real photography, I think it's applicable if you are, say, uploading your selects, your top picks from a shoot or something like that. There are great solutions. For instance, PhotoShelter, the website company I use, they have a subscription service that offers unlimited storage. That's great, but think about the fact that I was on a portrait shoot yesterday, a portrait of a single person that, one person, but those, whatever I shot, maybe 300 frames, ended up being about 40 gigabytes. And that's just the raw files. That's before I've made any TIFFs or PSDs or anything like that. So uploading 40 gigs to the cloud is not feasible. And I have a fiber optic Fios connection at home. Even with that, it's not feasible. So you got to think about the fact that there are some solutions that can work, but to me, I have not found a cloud solution yet. It'll get to that at some point. We're going to get faster and faster, but it's really tough to manage very, very large files. I think right now I have, what do I have? 1632.
30.
Yeah, I have about between 25 and 30 terabytes of files right now, and my storage is larger than that. But all that happens is we just continue to shoot larger and larger files and get bigger and better cameras. And I don't know, if you do this for a living, you amass a huge amount of information and you need somewhere to put it. And really the only solution is to keep buying more and more hard drives. Luckily things are getting cheaper and more efficient and all that stuff. But yeah, managing media is a tough thing to do, for sure. All set on this end? Mm-hmm. Cool. We're tethered in here? Great.
So, how many of you have actually used Capture One. I'm just curious.
Couple people? All
What
right.
about Lightroom? Cool. And Photoshop?
Everyone's used that.
Cool. So Capture One was a little confusing when I switched over from Lightroom. I still use Lightroom, you know, for different reasons. The catalog is amazing to have all your work right there. Generally, I work in sessions in Capture One, which is basically a 1 or 2 day job, and I have it all labeled into resolutions. Sorry.
Just go back to
I just want to get that. Okay.
There we go.
So, if you can, oh yeah, my resolution is just weird on my screen.
That's fine.
Basically, I'll create a session, and it's a collection of images within your Finder, and it's all in one thing. So if I drag over this folder, which is the session, that's everything. So there's no catalog where you need to rearrange files or anything. So it's a different organization system basically for a photographer, but
It takes some getting used to for sure,
Yeah.
but it is something that I've sort of had to get used to as the standard. In that, at the end of a shoot day when Mike and I work together, he'll hand me off a hard drive with the full take on it that's organized in the way that Capture One lays it out. So it has your capture folder, your output if you say output at the end of the day, any JPEGs or TIFFs from those raw files and so forth. So the organization, yeah, it does take some learning, but that's with any program, any piece of software we're using. So
the generator, though, for the engine that's generating previews from the raw files in Capture One is really is amazing. It's being updated and
yeah, I think that's probably the biggest advantage is that the color in Capture One is pretty great. That's why so many people use it in post-processing for color grading because it's pretty amazing. Mike has up here on the screen, if you want to go back to that first setup. This was a recent shoot that we worked on at my studio in Brooklyn with Yves Matthew. I think I showed you a picture of him before on a ladder when I was going over my work. And this is sort of what a general capture session looks like. Mike has it set up into, as if I were the client and I have particular specs. It's set up so there's shot 1, shot 2, shot 3. So he has everything organized there. As you can see on the screen right down here, there's the test shots in the beginning, and then from there, everything is organized and labeled and all of that. So this right now, these are just out of camera. These are my raw files, nothing more to it. I think we just wanted to show really quickly, like a very simple, straightforward color grade, and then we'll just show you setting up a capture session quickly in this as well. Because we do have to be a little cognizant of time. So for this, I would say...
why don't we do something just really quick? And
Yeah,
then we can
absolutely.
jump in. So usually a photographer will have me put a quick color grade on it. I'll put like a little bit of an S-curve.
I tend to like things, say, a little bit cooler than warmer sometimes. And again, I generally speaking don't have too much of a concern of going too deep into the shadows because I tend to like things that are a bit dramatic.
So there's a lot of tools in Capture One to go over color. It's really fun to play around because it's a little different than the way Lightroom works. But there's a lot of reasons to do it because you could set a complete, for example, let's turn this to black and white. If you wanted to be shooting in black and white, for example, you could have all the photos coming in black and white, right, straight off the bat. Oops.
So we can set a color grade in the beginning of the day. As Mike said earlier, when we're in a studio, say before the client gets there, we have lighting set up, we do a test shot to make sure that the Tether connections are working and all of that stuff. But it's also because we do want to get a general color grade down. Let's say, so I showed you that mood board earlier. So let's say there's a certain type of vibe or a certain type of color tone that we want to go for that the client wants me to reproduce, then he and I can work together before the client gets there to get a color grade pretty well dialed in. And then he can set it up so every frame that comes in, even though it's a raw frame coming out of camera, I still have that raw unprocessed file. He can actually have that color grade applied to the images as they show up on the screen. So the client's seeing it as they envisioned it, even though we still have those raw files there. So it's a really valuable tool in that regard.
Okay, I'm just going to show everyone a quick session just to start getting you guys going. And this is a great program, and you can download a 30-day free trial from Phase 1. Phase 1 makes Capture 1, so I've probably been switching those a bunch.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. Okay, so basically opening up Capture 1, it's right down here. Open it up and your previous session might show up, but you basically just go to File, New Session.
What do we want to call it? Adorama
Okay, let's just do Test.
or test.
Test, and then you pick out where your file is your file folder of file. I don't even know how to explain this. Where you want to save it in the Finder on your computer. So in this case, we're going to save it to Pictures on my Mac. And here you go. So if you go to the first tab and come down, it's called Capture Folder. Right now, technically, you could start shooting. I can see right now that the camera is connected. When it's not connected, you'll see the camera icons, everything goes black. And there you go, the camera's back on. But a quick thing that I like to do is I like to separate the folders. I don't want to have a whole shot. If I shot for a couple hours, I want to have everything separated a little bit. And this is different people's preferences. But if you right click on Capture Folder and Show in Finder, you can see exactly where the pictures are and they're being shot to capture. And I'll just add in whatever folder I want.
So like a shot 1, shot 2
So you
type
can
of
name
thing,
it
or?
whatever you want, but I'll just name it Shot 1. And then I'll come back to Capture 1 and show in Library, which is the same situation.
It's just showing you the folder
It's
hierarchy.
showing exactly where everything is being shot to. And you'll go to the Capture folder, and then you can see the folders that you're making in Capture 1. And I'll set that as the Capture folder, which is basically where, when you're shooting, it's being saved, the raw images are. You want to take some pictures?
We're just gonna take a quick
A
snap
couple
if we could.
Snaps.
Let's see where that goes. Beautiful. Yep.
All right.
So the image is in there.
So
Of course, this is not a lighting or composition class, but well, that's all right. Not some of my best work, but you all look great.
yeah,
I mean, those are the basics of it. It's very straightforward. And right in here, again, as he said, this is where you can do all of your color grading and all of that, and essentially then apply those color grades to any of the work that's going to come in after the fact. But, pretty straightforward, right? As far as tethering goes, it's a cord directly from your camera into the computer into a pretty simple piece of software that enables you to do a whole lot more than you could ever do on the back of here. Like in a pinch, I've actually there's like raw processing built into a lot of cameras. I know I have it on my Nikon bodies where like I can do, NEF, which is the Nikon RAW file. I can do NEF processing just if I need to send something off really quickly. But I'm going through menus with a little tiny toggle switch and wheel, and it's far from ideal. So the second you can move over here, it opens up a whole new world of possibilities.
I think we're totally running out of time here.
We are running out of time,
Yeah.
but
Should we take more questions?
yeah, another question over here.
It was very astronomical head. Do you ever need a level head to give you precise precision when you adjust your camera angles?
Do we ever need a precision head to shoot something in a more of a precise way, a precision level head. Not so much me personally, but I think that comes into play certainly if you're doing something architecturally, if you're doing something that's maybe shooting food or shooting something, maybe some macro work, something like that in studio where moving the slightest inch here or there is going to make a big difference. For the type of work I do though, generally speaking, I'll have it tethered set up on a tripod or a light stand, but I'm often shooting handheld. I rarely shoot on tripod as far as my camera goes because I like to shoot pretty loosely. I don't like to be tied down and having a camera on a ball head on a tripod. I'll have him working the computer over there, or sometimes it's just me. But yeah, I'm sort of shooting pretty loosely. I'm not one to like do a little click here or there. But everybody shoots differently, and there are certainly jobs that do call for that type of tech. Yes?
When you shoot Tether, do you also shoot to the card as well?
It's a very good question. When you shoot Tether, do you shoot to the card as well, or just the camera?
No, just the camera. There was a point where you couldn't actually shoot with a Nikon with a card in it, but I think that's changed. But generally, I like to have no cameras in camera.
No cards in the camera. You're
Yeah.
shooting to the computer.
But if you're shooting with a medium format, phase 1 or a Canon, and possibly a Nikon now, and you're having problems with the tether, like going out, what could happen is you could have a card in there and something is going on with tethering, and you were shooting a bunch of photos, and I'm uploading them, and then I'm like, oh, like camera went out, and you continue shooting a couple, then you'll catch those pictures on the card, but you can't actually save to card and
computer. It's kind of one or the
computer
other.
with Capture One.
There used to be, and I haven't used it in some time, but there is a Nikon tethering software. It's made by Nikon Camera Control 2, or I don't know what number it's at this point. But with Camera Control, that actually did enable you to shoot to the card, the computer, or both, which was really nice. But again, that was a Nikon specific thing. No other tether software that I know of enables you to do that. So, I mean, you kind of have to hope for the best and hope that your technology is gonna do as it's supposed to do. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty safe once it gets to your computer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
My cameras are APCS format. Can you tell me be used for that?
APCS format cameras, can those be used for tethering? Is that what you're asking?
What is it? Do you know the make of the
I'm actually
camera?
not.
Nikon. I'm sure you could.
Sensor issue is more of a firmware than the camera issue.
That's a good question.
There's a list, like if you go to phase 1 support, there's a list of cameras that are supported with Capture One, and the same for Lightroom.
Speaking to the particulars of that camera as well, there are lots and lots of helpful resources on the internet, of course. And a lot of those things do pertain to exactly what we're talking about tonight. For instance, tethertalk.com, that's Tether Tools blog. There's a ton of great information on there about all things tethering. So I'm sure that you could go on there and find out precisely if your camera is going to work with that. And for those of you taking a picture of the screen, just so you know, this will be archived online as well. So this will be available on YouTube, so you can use this as a resource after the fact. Tethertools.com/guides is another really good resource. They have downloadable PDF guides covering everything from finding the right tethering setup to troubleshooting any tethering issues you may have, to behind the scenes looks at photographers on set. Adorama Learning Center, part of what we're doing here, this is all under that umbrella. There's tons of great information and videos on all things photography on their site, as well as lots of great free classes like this. So I encourage you to check that out as well. YouTube.com/phase1. Phase 1, as Mike said, it is the maker of Capture One, and it's the really great resource for how-to videos and troubleshooting. And of course, there's a lot of great online learning like Creative Live, Kelby One, Lynda, all of those sites. Just really great courses. Some of them you can even take for free, but basically, there's no excuse to not find answers at this point. We just have so many great answers at our fingertips via the web. So definitely encourage you to look through all that. And of course, you can check out more of our work and check out our, my socials and Mike's socials and all of that there as well. Yeah, so I I hope this was really informative for all of you. Are there any other questions before we kind of wrap up over here and we all get kicked out of the store? Yes.
This is probably more for Mike, just some
Yeah.
advice. Because I've done the whole certified course.
Yeah.
I've talked to digital techs and done everything, and I tech only on my shoots, but I'm interested in being in other photographers. What would be your suggestion to get out there? Because I have talked to some of the studios about teching, and they usually want to know who have you tech for. But if you, it's like pitch 22, you
Yeah.
can't really get that experience.
Uh-huh.
I mean, other than teching for yourself. So, any suggestions on getting yourself out there as a digital?
So
When I moved to New
the question, just to repeat it real quick,
Oh.
just so the online audience can hear it as well, is essentially, essentially just asking for some advice and insight from Mike. You are Phase 1, Capture 1 certified, and basically, how do you get out there? How do you get started in this industry? If you don't have experience, it's really tough to break through that barrier of people want to know who you've been hired for and the work that you've done. And if you don't have that, it's really, it's tough to kind of prove yourself. So, cool.
Tether Tools also just answered that smart shooter software allows you to shoot the card.
Oh, okay. We just got a comment from Tether Tools who are also watching online. Smart shooter software? Sharpshooter or smart shooter software is another piece of tethering software. I'm not familiar with it, but apparently that enables you to shoot to computer as well as to card. So definitely worth checking that out as well. Thanks, Lauren and Liz.
answer your question though, when I moved to New York, I just put out a ton of feelers. I got to Milk and I understood that there was a lot of people working, much more than when I was in New Zealand or even in LA when I spent some time in LA. But I just emailed, I emailed anyone I could. I called people, which I wouldn't actually suggest doing, cold calling. But I was going down to photo agencies and talking to people, and I was also assisting. So I was asking a million questions to other techs and stuff. And there was one really amazing tech, Esteban, I'm trying to remember his last name, Aledro?
I know him.
Esteban. And he was one of the first people I met when I got here, and we got drinks together, and he was really helpful, just laying out how people are getting hired as a tech, and the differences. Because when in New Zealand, when I was an assistant, I would be running Capture One, but it wasn't nearly to the extent of what's happening in New York and LA and London. So it was really useful to kind of get a lay of the land and why it's so tech heavy on some of these sets compared to in New Zealand where we just have a laptop and I'd be carrying it around.
And Mike emailed me. He cold
Yeah.
emailed me. So
Yeah.
he reached out to me. He had seen, I think, a blog post I did for another brand, for a lighting company that I work with, ProPhoto. And he saw a blog post and thought it was cool and sent an email to introduce himself. I think you had just moved here at that point, I believe.
Pretty close, yeah.
And from New Zealand, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I had a photo shoot with, I was photographing a photographer and director from New Zealand,
Tom Guild.
Tom Guild,
Yeah.
and it just so happened that I made the connection in my head. I was like, oh, this assistant who just moved here, this is 4 or 5 years ago, just moved here from New Zealand, and I have the shoot with a guy from New Zealand. I mean, I don't know anything about New Zealand. Why don't I hire him? And he seemed cool in the emails, and I think we spoke on the phone and all of that, but there was just this weird connection, and he started assisting like crazy, and then as I got, I'll say kind of more and more interesting work as the years went by, and for instance, got to photograph President Obama, and he was the first person I, thought to bring to the White House with me, and I remember calling him and saying I didn't tell him what we were doing. I just said, hey man, do you have a suit? And are you available next Thursday or whatever it was? And he's like, no, I don't have a suit. I was like, can you get one? He's like, yeah, why? What's up? I was like, you're coming to the White House. And he's like,
Yeah.
So, I always see this, and we were just talking about this earlier. This industry to me is really about relationships. And sure, I have people that email me fairly regularly. You want to assist or tech or intern or what have you. And I encourage you and anyone else doing those sorts of things to be persistent, to stay in touch, not be overbearing. You don't want to, knock on someone's door every week, but Stay in touch with people, let them know what you're up to, and you know, if personalities click, then there will be work there for sure. But it's just persistence, really, and like.
But also, like, we should talk about, like, once you do a couple of jobs, like if you came on with us and did a job, and it worked out, like that's it's like human connection. And I might get a job that I can't do, and I need another tech, and then you refer, you know, Drew. I would refer you to Drew because I'm busy that day.
Sure.
And it's such
a
a
pretty small
freelance world where
community,
it's like a lot of communication, and I don't want to. You know, I want to know who I'm referring to other photographers because I want to make sure that they're doing a good job. And it also reflects on me. If I, you know, refer someone that is not a very good tech or not a very nice person, then I don't want that reflected on me.
Of course.
But it's a really small industry, and I think. But
this is why
breaking
you're
into
here,
it though was me just like hustling. Like I would get on set as an assistant, as sometimes the fourth assistant, and I would be coiling the cords in the background, even though I could light the whole, you know, I play whatever role I'm at. So if I got hired as a third assistant, I'll coil all the cords and I'll keep my mouth shut if I have to. But you want to be helpful on set in whatever role you're at, and I think that's something that I try to practice.
And coming out to events like this and joining other photo organizations, ASMPs and APAs and all of that, and like going to great events like Photoville, which just happened the last 2 weekends, like there is a really strong, great community, and it is a lot smaller than you'd think. So it's just a matter of immersing yourself as best as possible. And like we're meeting you, this is great, and like I encourage you to stay in touch with us. But we do need to wrap up. We're told that the gates are closed, so I don't know if that means are we allowed out, or are we like I think we might be stuck here for the night. We're here.
Eat candy all night.
But thank you all so much for coming. Really appreciate it,
Yeah.
and hope it was
Thank you.
great. Thank you.
Awesome.